What you're about to hear isn't politics, it's a moral earthquake. A sitting member of Congress just shattered the silence surrounding one of America's darkest hypocrisies. In a hearing that was supposed to be about immigration and law enforcement, he dropped words so raw, so direct, that the entire room fell still. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't a gaffe. It was an indictment, a rare moment when truth broke through the polished lies of Washington. For years, the political class has told Americans to trust the system, trust the courts, trust the people in power. But what happens when the system itself becomes a shield for the powerful and a weapon against the powerless?
Only child predator who is being protected by Mike Johnson, who is being protected by Kristi Noem, who is being protected by every one of our Republican colleagues who refuses to do their goddamn job right now. And we got to call that out in the same way Jasmine Crockett just did. I can get real emotional here, but I'm going to try to stay within the bounds of the law, at least for a little while. Mr. Fee, Fifth Amendment says that every American, not every American, everybody within our borders has a right to due process. 14th Amendment says that everybody has afforded equal protection under the law. The Fourth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, no unlawful search and seizure. You can't be detained, cruel and unusual punishment. At what point in ICE's current process are they affording detainees with those rights?
It's difficult to identify any point in the process where they're following any of their detainees' rights consistently.
So is there a timing? When do they provide somebody with information? What's the legal basis for your detention? When do they provide people with notification of your due process rights? Ever?
In the instances that I've been involved with, it has not happened.
And is there any, I mean, we all watch cop shows, right? We all know the Miranda warning. Is there any exemption that ICE is not obligated to provide people with their constitutional protections that other law enforcement agents have?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so let me shift now to Broadview. ICE right now has this online detainee locator system, which is not mandated by law, right? They're providing this that you can look and see if somebody is being detained. That database does not provide any information about anybody in these quote-unquote temporary holding facilities, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so nobody knows. People get picked up off the street, they get swept up, they get disappeared. They don't know what their rights are, and we don't know where they are. Is that legal under any reasonable reading of the Constitution?
Absolutely not, and these folks are denied access to counsel as a matter of policy, and they're constitutionally entitled to that, and they do not receive it.
Okay. Several of our witnesses, I think Pastor Black had mentioned this, I think I'm forgetting, but several of you had mentioned that if you're breaking the law, there are consequences that can be held. I know people had mentioned our governor should maybe step up, maybe our attorney general. My understanding is that a lot of the enforcement of law is typically done by district attorneys, state's attorneys. Can you give any sense of the process for state's attorneys and district attorneys who are watching today? What process would they need to go through to prosecute ICE officers who, as law enforcement officers, are expressly violating people's constitutional protections? And whether you want to talk about breaking and entering, whether you want to talk about unlawful search and seizure, whether you want to talk about murder, I mean, all of these things seem to be happening. What is the process? Do states' attorneys have the ability to use that right now? District attorneys, what would they have to do in order to begin bringing penalties against these individuals?
I'd have to defer to my colleagues in the state government, but certainly folks have the right to get civil remedies against violations of the Constitution by federal law enforcement, and people are moving in that direction and are seeking that redress in courts.
Okay, well, I hope we can give some thought about that. California several years ago did bring charges against an ICE officer. Now, he was off duty when they did it, but there is a precedent for state officials doing that. And, you know, those of us who are out here who are angry, we're responsible for writing the laws. We don't have law enforcement authority, and I think our law enforcement partners can help. Pastor Black, I'd like to give you the final word, and I see I'm running out of time here. Speaker Johnson famously said, if you want to know what I believe, just read the Bible. You want to preach for us of any particular passages from the Bible that he might want to be reminded of as he thinks about whether or not he should?
What happens when those who preach morality use it as camouflage for corruption? That's the question Representative Sean Casten forced everyone to face. And the reason his words shook the Capitol wasn't just because of who he called out. It was because of what he revealed about how deep the rot goes that he began with a story. A teacher told him she feared not the uniformed officers meant to protect her community, but the masked ones who might disappear her students in the dead of night. Her fear wasn't of law enforcement. It was of lawlessness disguised as authority. That's the twisted reality Kasten exposed. A world where justice bends for the powerful and breaks the moment it touches the weak. Then came the line that turned a quiet hearing into a national moment. Kasten said that certain leaders in power, those who claim to fight for family values, are protecting people accused of the most heinous crimes imaginable. He didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like someone who'd had enough. He named names, called out the silence, and accused his colleagues of hiding behind scripture while shielding predators from accountability. And that's where the hearing stopped being about immigration. It became something else entirely. It became a moral confrontation, a line drawn in the sand between those who protect justice and those who protect privilege. Kasten's message was simple but devastating. The same politicians who talk about defending children refuse to demand the release of the Epstein files. The same leaders who call themselves moral crusaders have spent years shielding those accused of preying on the vulnerable. And the same people who shout law and order are the ones turning law into a weapon of fear. Because when he looked across that hearing room, he didn't just see his political opponents. He saw the embodiment of a system that punishes the powerless while protecting the elite. That he reminded everyone that the Constitution wasn't written for the rich, it was written for everyone. But somewhere along the way, that promise was broken. He asked a chilling question. At what point in the current immigration enforcement process are people being given their constitutional rights? The answer, from the witness sitting before him, was blunt. It's difficult to identify any point. That moment was haunting, because it confirmed what too many already knew. People are being detained without due process, held without counsel, and sometimes simply vanished. Families don't know where their loved ones are. Communities don't know who's being taken or why. And the agencies doing it all. They claim to be upholding the law, while violating it at every turn. Kasten wasn't content to let that slide. He pressed further, asking whether any law exempted immigration officers from basic constitutional duties like providing detainees with their rights or notifying them of charges. The response was chilling. Absolutely not. There are no exemptions, no secret clauses, just deliberate violations, carried out in the name of authority. That's when the weight of the conversation shifted. Kasten wasn't just exposing hypocrisy, he was outlining a pattern. Because whether it's law enforcement disappearing families or political leaders burying evidence of exploitation, the thread connecting it all is power without accountability. It's the idea that some people are too important to face justice. He turned the conversation toward solutions, asking whether state attorneys or district prosecutors could step in when federal agencies fail to uphold the law. Could anyone bring charges against officers who commit abuses under the guise of enforcement? The witnesses admitted the truth. It's nearly impossible. The structure itself protects those in uniform, the same way political influence protects those at the top. That's when Kasten's frustration became visible. He wasn't angry for the cameras. He was angry because he understood the scale of impunity. Because the same pattern that shields corrupt politicians also shields abusive officers. Accountability stops where power begins. And just when the hearing seemed like it couldn't get heavier, one of the witnesses, Pastor Black, brought the conversation back to something bigger than law. He reminded the committee that morality doesn't end at the edge of politics. He quoted scripture not to defend the powerful, but to call them out. If you want to know what I believe, Speaker Johnson once said, read the Bible. Pastor Black responded by saying that the God he believes in suffers with the oppressed, not the oppressors. That's not politics. That's faith in its rawest form. That he described the current system as a federally sanctioned trafficking operation, a phrase that froze the room. Because beneath all the legal language and political performance, that's what he saw, a government that detains, dehumanizes, and disappears people while claiming to defend freedom. He spoke for those without power, without money, without access to the media. He spoke for the ones who vanish quietly while politicians argue loudly about morality. Kasten gave him the floor because this wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about conscience, about who we are as a nation when no one's watching. And as Pastor Black finished, The hearing room didn't feel like politics anymore. It felt like confession. Because when the most powerful government on earth uses its authority to terrorize the vulnerable, when the same leaders who quote scripture ignore its teachings about justice and mercy, that's not leadership. That's blasphemy wrapped in bureaucracy. What makes Kasten's moment so powerful isn't just what he said, it's what it represents. For decades, we've watched scandals rise and vanish, names come and go, hearings held and forgotten. But this one hit different because it didn't just expose individuals, it exposed the culture that protects them. The belief that accountability is negotiable, that justice only applies to those without influence, that it's the same disease that allowed Epstein to operate in plain sight for years. The same rot that lets officials bury investigations. The same mentality that turns faith into a political brand instead of a moral code. When Kasten connected these dots, between the political, the legal, and the moral, it became impossible to unsee the pattern. You start realizing how everything fits together. The silence on the Epstein files, the double standards in law enforcement, the selective outrage that always seems to protect the powerful. It's not random. It's the system doing exactly what it was built to do: shield the elite and distract the rest. That's why this hearing mattered. Because every time someone in power gets away with corruption, the message to ordinary people is simple: your pain doesn't matter, your rights aren't guaranteed, and your voice only counts when it serves their agenda. But not everyone is willing to stay silent. Kasten's defiance wasn't performative, it was an act of resistance. He wasn't just talking about policy failures. He was calling out moral bankruptcy. He was reminding everyone watching that justice without equality is just privilege wearing a badge. And in that moment, he forced everyone in that chamber, and everyone watching, to choose sides. Do you stand with those who twist religion to justify cruelty, or with those who still believe faith demands compassion? Do you side with the powerful who hide behind the flag, or the people who believe patriotism means holding power accountable? Because this isn't just about one administration, one agency, or one scandal. It's about whether truth still matters when it threatens money and influence. It's about whether morality still exists when it's no longer politically convenient. What Kasten and Pastor Black did was rare. They peeled back the mask and showed the human cost of political theater. Behind every hearing statistic is a life uprooted. Behind every constitutional violation is a family waiting for answers. And behind every cover-up is a system that values power over principle. The most haunting line of the entire exchange came not from anger, but from faith. Pastor Black said that Jesus is alive and suffering with those detained. That line wasn't for applause, it was a mirror, a reminder that morality means nothing if it disappears the moment politics begin. That's what makes this hearing so defining, because it exposed how far we've strayed from justice that serves all. It forced the uncomfortable truth that moral decay doesn't start in the streets. It starts in the halls of power, and while most politicians avoid naming that truth, Kasten said it out loud. His words tore through the carefully constructed walls of hypocrisy that have kept this country from reckoning with its failures. He didn't do it for attention. He did it because silence has consequences. For too long, America has treated accountability like an option, not a duty. But moments like this prove that truth can still cut through the noise. That one person, armed with conviction, can expose what an entire institution tries to bury. Because this isn't just a story about a lawmaker calling out corruption. It's a story about conscience versus convenience, about faith versus fear, about a system that has chosen comfort over courage. And here's the part that matters most. This moment wasn't about partisanship. It was about principle. Because no democracy can survive when its laws only protect those who write them. No faith can claim righteousness while excusing cruelty. And no society can call itself free if truth has to whisper while lies get microphones. Kasten's voice, amplified by Pastor Black's conviction, became something bigger than politics. It became a warning that if we don't confront this rot now, it will consume everything that justice was meant to protect. So when you hear what he said, don't hear it as an attack. Hear it as a challenge to everyone watching, everyone listening, everyone tired of the same cycle of silence and cover-ups. Because real accountability doesn't start in hearings. It starts when people refuse to look away, and that's where you come in. If you believe that morality should mean something again, if you believe that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, should be above justice, then make sure you're subscribed. Because here, we don't just talk about corruption, we expose it. We connect the dots, challenge hypocrisy, and defend the truth when others won't. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join the fight for accountability, because the only thing more dangerous than corruption is silence.